Good morning. Thank you for being here this morning as we continue our study of the flood. Before we get started in class, let's go to God in prayer. Dear Father in heaven, thank you so much for this wonderful day that you've given to us. I pray that you will help us to see the way that you bless us each and every day, and that we'll be thankful for those blessings. Dear Father, help us today as we gather together to study your word, that our eyes will be open and our heart and our mind will be open to receive your word with joy, but we'll also see exactly how you want us to live, that we can learn from the life of Noah and how he lived, even in such a difficult time. I pray that you will be with us as we continue to strive to live for you. Help us in all that we do to bring glory and honor to you. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so this morning I'm going to kind of combine the two lessons and then change the lesson for tonight. Tonight I encourage you to be with us. What I want to talk about tonight is the promises of God. You know, they don't seem to cover that in these series of 5 lessons, so I wanted to talk about that tonight. So today, we're going to talk about the animals, and then we're going to talk about the flood waters themselves. So let's begin by talking about the animals. The first question, what does the Bible say about the animals that Noah brought into the ark? What do we know? What do we know about the animals he brought into the ark? All right, they came in 2 of each kind. They came in pairs. What else do we know? All right, well, let's see what the word says. In Genesis 6:19 and 20, it says, "And of every living thing of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Of the birds after their kind, of the animals after their kind, of every creeping thing of the earth after its kind. 2 of every kind will come to you to keep them alive." So just what you said, there was 2, a male and his female, that came into the ark. But listen to what it says in 7 verses 2 and 3. "And you shall take with you 7 each of every clean animal, a male and his female, 2 each of animals that are unclean, a male and his female. Also 7 each of the birds of the air, male and female, to keep the species alive on the face of the earth." Have you noticed that before? That he asked them to take 7 of the clean animals. Now, the debate is, if you look at different commentaries, they will say, was it 7 total or 7 pair? And I'm not sure we have a good answer. I'm not sure the Bible's completely clear. Some translations say a 7 of the clean animal, a male and his female, which could possibly mean that there was actually 14 total, or there was 7. Let's just go with the idea that it was 7. Why do you think that God had 7 clean animals brought into the ark? What's that? They ate clean animals. Why else? Sacrifices. So those are the 2 things. We don't know exactly why it was told at that time, for the clean, except for the idea that they would need it for sacrifices and food. How do we know they were given sacrifices at this time? When were the first sacrifices made that we know of? What's that? Nope, it was before then. Who was that? Cain and Abel. Remember, they both brought a sacrifice to God. And it says Abel by faith, by the word of God, by the way that he had commanded them to sacrifice. And so we know that sacrifices were already being made during this time and expected during this time. And I wish I would have looked this up. Maybe somebody else will know the answer to this. When were they commanded to start eating clean animals compared to unclean? Was that only with Moses and the law, or was it before then? And I'm asking that question. I don't have the answer, and I should. If not, I'll try to get it to you soon. Try to have it tonight, maybe. All right, something we'll look up. We'll look up all together and figure that out. Yes?
What about that?
Can we just leave the snakes out? I would have been for it, by the way. The snakes always call mosquitoes. Think about the list of things that you just think, fruit flies, why do we have these things? Every time that we have the animal guy come to school and he's showing the kid, he always has a snake. And every time I'm just sitting there going, please don't get close to me. Please don't get close to me. I can't stand snakes. I'm like you. I'd have left the snakes off the boat. Question 2, how did Noah gather all of those animals to get them into the ark? Did he have to go out and gather them up, find them all? It says in Genesis 6:20, 2 of every kind will come to you to keep them alive. As you think about life, you sit there and you think, how many animals do I don't even know exist? It's always neat. Kyle Butt and Eric Lyons, both of Apologetics Press, will do different series of lessons on different types of animals that God made and their uniqueness. And it's really neat because I'm sitting there going, I didn't even know those animals existed. Can you imagine as Noah's watching all these animals start coming in? He's like, what is that? I've never seen that before. And he's also counting them as they go through. Well, there's 2 of that one. I guess that's a male and a female. All right. There's 2 of these. There's 7 of these. All right. How awesome would that have been to watch those animals just line up? And were the sons in the boat already? The sons and daughter-in-laws in the boat already saying, all right, elephants, come on. This is where y'all are going to be. All right, horses, over here. This is where y'all, bears, lions, tigers. Ooh, what about all these insects? Mosquitoes, ants, spiders. All those things came into the boat. And he just watched them go by. And they put them in their location that they had built for them. How amazing and awesome would that have been to watch that process? How did Noah take care of all those animals for an entire year? We see in Genesis 6:21, and you shall take for yourselves of all food that is eaten, and you shall gather it to yourselves, and it shall be food for you and for them. I wonder in this process, because we're talking about a whole year of food for all these animals. Now, there is always a chance that God calls some of these animals to hibernate, some of these things. I don't know the process or what all happened. But we also think about the 7 clean animals. Was that 7th animal part of this food equation for them and for the other animals? Possibly. Possibly that was part of it. We don't have all the answers. We just know that they were supposed to do all that they could according to God's plan, and God would provide the rest. Don't you believe that? I do. I believe that that Noah did the best that he could to provide exactly how God said with the information he had, and then God just took care of the rest. He made it happen. He made it complete. And we don't know, God may have given him a lot more specific instructions. Not just, I want you to fill up this one area. All right, I just want you to provide food for everybody. Maybe he said, this is exactly what I mean by this. But I don't know that. God doesn't always give us all the information, does he? Sometimes he just tells us to do something, and he wants us to do it to the best of our ability with the information that we have, and then trust that he'll take care of the rest. Trust that God's going to provide and be with us and lead us and guide us. He does that, doesn't he? Time and time again, we see he did it for Noah, and we see how he does it for us. Questions or comments? And I've forgotten about that, but that is right. And if you think about the window, let's just say that window kind of went around the top portion of the ark that provided for ventilation, that provided for some sunlight after the 40 days and 40 nights of rain. Was it possible that they could have had some type of a garden within the boat where the light would have come in and reflected in and caused a garden to grow? Again, all these things may have limitations with man, but could be possible with God. Yeah. And you think about that. What did it look like then? Exactly. There's so much that he could have limited because, and you think about in some of these third world countries, how little they eat and still survive and still function completely well. We look at it from our point of view and think of how much we get to eat and the abundance that we get to eat. And we think that's almost impossible. But with them, how do we know what God was having them to live off of and how long that lasted? Very good point. So were there dinosaurs on the ark? Genesis 6, 19 to 20, 7, 13 through 16. It says, every living thing, all flesh, every beast after its kind, all flesh, in which is breath of life. You know, this is what I left out of the rest of the animals, is just about everything else talked about dinosaurs, and almost every bit of it is what Kyle Butt covered just a few weeks ago. So I didn't want to go back through that again. Where dinosaur means giant lizard, where he talked about the word dinosaur didn't really even come into existence until the 1840s. And if you go back and look in the Bible, behemoth and leviathan, and when you look at those descriptions of those beasts, they go along with what a dinosaur looks like. So if you look in the book of Job, those things were listed, the behemoth and the Leviathan. If you look at ancient civilizations across different continents, Cambodia, Asia, even in North America, I believe it was Utah, there are different carvings of dinosaurs, even on different gravestones. I believe it was in Asia. And all these things Kyle went through and talked about, that dinosaurs would have existed after the flood. We just didn't know what it was because the word dinosaur didn't come into existence until 1840. So even within the Bible, you know, the Bible was translated into English for the first time in the 1500s. So that word wouldn't have come into existence. The other point that he brought out is just because dinosaurs not mentioned doesn't mean they don't exist. How many animals that we know of are not listed in the Bible, but we know exist? Penguins, not listed in the Bible. There's so many animals that aren't listed in the Bible, but we know that they exist. So the odds of dinosaurs being on the ark is most likely true. And again, don't forget we talked about Wednesday night. Most likely all these animals came in a juvenile state, a younger state, so they're not fully grown by the time that they get onto the ark. One, because of size, but also two, because of once they got off the ark, God wanted them to live a good long life out on the earth. So most of these animals would have been smaller, juvenile, young in age. Questions or comments about that? Yes. Yes. You know, and that's something that I would love to know the answer to. You know, that Pangea idea where all the continents at one time joined together and most likely were broken up during the flood. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But it gives evidence that most likely during this time where all these animals, either two of a kind or seven of its kind, got off the ark and reproduced until the earth was filled again. And how did these animals get to other continents unless they were close enough at that time for them to be able to cross to? So things that we don't definitely know the answer to, but it gives us an idea that might be a great possibility. Other questions? All right, so now let's talk about the flood. And there are some things on here that I'm going to act like I know what I'm talking about when it comes to scientific, but if you have any objections, understand I'm limited. I'm not going to deny it. I didn't do well in science classes, so we're going to hope for the best. I did my best to do a lot of studying, so I would at least say things close to correct. Let's first talk about the biblical evidence of the flood. In Genesis 7, verse 11, it says, "On that day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up." What's the great deep it's talking about? Most of it is going to be the ocean floor. It broke up. There it is. All right, so things that I'm going to act like I know what I'm talking about. All right, so the earth has different layers to it. It has an inner core, an outer core, a mantle, and then the crust, what we live on, even the ocean floor, all that's the crust of the earth. So what they're saying has happened when the fountains of the deep broke up. That means they're down there at the mantle. The mantle broke apart on the ocean floor, causing the heat to hit the cold ocean floor, causing geysers to shoot up through the ocean floor out into the atmosphere, causing a global rain. All that's possible. So that would have caused a global rain across the earth during that time, because that would have happened not just in one location, but all across the earth. The other thing that somebody said was a possibility that I thought could be true. You know, there's a lot of people who like exploring caves. You know, and scientists believe that just over time with water and other things, it just has kind of formed out those caves. But would it have been possible that those underground water supplies would have broke loose as well, and it could have shot water through those rocks, causing those caves to develop during the flood? Also a possibility. Because I imagine the floodwaters came from all over the earth. It was not just individual locations. It also says the windows of heaven were open. What do you think that means? I think that's just all it means, is a big downpour. Maybe it was where the global rain took place from all these geysers and everything shooting up into the atmosphere that it caused, because it hadn't rained before then. So, you know, were there clouds in the sky before then? I don't know. Obviously, they hadn't got to the point where they developed rain. So, but no matter what, we know that the windows of heaven were open. You know, what I imagine here is about a little over a week ago, it was a day where it wasn't supposed to rain at all, and all of a sudden there was one cell that just happened to develop right here in Summertown. And it was one of those downpours. One of those times that it was just heavy, thick raindrops, and it was just pouring. And within that 5 minutes, you already saw the ground start to cover. I was like, wow, we weren't supposed to get anything today. But can you imagine that happening for 40 days and 40 nights? You know, sometimes you think about there's a light rain and you kind of think, yeah, I can walk, you know, from here to there and it'll still be fine. But, you know, what about when those heavy downpours happen and you're sitting there in a building thinking, I need to go to my car, but yeah, I don't know. I don't want to get soaked by the time I get there. It's those type of rains I think we're dealing with. It was so heavy and it was coming so fast. Can you imagine living it during that time? How awesome that would have been. Not only that it's coming down, you've never seen rain before, and it's coming down so heavy and so hard, and you're living in some type of I don't know, maybe they lived in caves during that time, maybe they lived in areas, I don't know where they live, but they're sitting inside feeling like they're pretty safe until all of a sudden they see water shooting up from the ground as well. They're seeing exploding out of rocks coming up. They see from a distance how it's just coming in. And all of a sudden, they look out there on the ground and they say, that water's getting high. What am I going to do? Where at some point in time, they've got to make a decision. Well, let's get to the highest level we can find. And so they go. I wonder how many of them took off toward maybe some boats that they thought, hey, we know there's a little area down there, and there's a boat. Hopefully it'll keep us afloat. By the time they got there, it's already filled with water. What are we going to do? It had to be amazing to them. And I wonder over this 100+ years that Noah had to be a preacher of righteousness, how many of them thought that during those moments, Noah said this is going to happen. I didn't listen. In Genesis 7:17, 18, and 24, it says, and the waters increased and prevailed and greatly increased on the earth, and the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. You know, it rained 40 days and 40 nights. But the water continued to rise over the earth. I don't know if the waters continued to rise from underneath, but it continued to rise across the earth for 150 days. Do we know how high it got above the highest mountain? We'll talk about that tonight, about 15 cubits, 22.5 feet. So some people will say, hey, you know, maybe this is just kind of a localized flood. You know, you got to think, you know, at this time, how many people truly existed? I do know it was 1,656 years according to the Bible, but how many actually lived? Was it 1,000 people, 10,000 people? Well, if it's just 10,000 people, we got more people in Lawrence County than 10,000. So how much space did they actually fill up at this time? Maybe it's 50,000 people at this time, but how much space would that really take? Maybe this is just a localized flood, and that's all this is, but it still wiped out all this area. Well, if that's the case, then why build the ark? Don't you think God in his wisdom could have easily said, Noah, I want you and your family, because it would have taken a lot less than 100 years, to just gather together all your stuff, and I want y'all to go to this new location. It's going to be way away from everybody else, anything you ever know, but you can just get away, and I'm going to kind of take care of this area. Well, why send the animals to Noah? Could he not do the same? If he's going to send all the animals to Noah, he could obviously send all those animals with Noah to a new location. So it says that the waters covered the mountains. That couldn't have been localizing. Well, what's the idea of sea level? What does that mean? That's kind of the average water level across the earth. So if all of a sudden in an area the water gets above sea level, what happens to that water eventually? It continues to flow out all the way until it gets to some type of body of water, until that water begins to expand. Mountains could not be covered until the sea level as a whole rises high enough to cover the mountains. So it's not possible for the mountains to be covered unless everything across the earth is covered. Then that gives us the question, well, is God a liar in what he's talking about there? He says, I establish my covenant with you that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. Well, if the idea is this earth is just a localized area, has God since then flooded and destroyed an area with water? Most definitely a localized area. Many localized areas have been destroyed by flood. So surely God's not a liar that he did that. He's talking about just a localized area. We know that God's talking about that this flood took over the whole earth as we know it. So we know that the waters subsided. The fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were also stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. So if we know that the fountains of the deep stopped and the waters from heaven stopped, what does it mean the waters from heaven were restrained? What do you think that means? It did. It quit raining. But do you think when it says that it's restrained, that now that's really where we have the rain clouds? We have that moisture that's gathered up into the atmosphere. And now we'll have rain throughout our lifetime. What do you think about that? That's right. It's gathered together. It's held back for an amount of time. This was interesting to me. It says the forming of the mountains. The mountains rose, and this is in Psalms 104, when she's talking about the flood, 6 through 9. It says, the mountains rose and the valleys sank down to a place that you had appointed for them. But why did he do this during this time? It says, you set a boundary that they may not pass, so that they might not again cover the earth. Talking about the flood. Do you realize, again, I'm going to talk like I know what I'm talking about, that during this time, the shift of all these plates, even the shift of the continents, would have created new mountain ranges, new areas as the waters formed, as things happened. Also, these valleys, as the mantle underneath broke loose and that heat shot up, now we have different valleys, different levels that have new formed, even the ocean floor. So maybe it's possible during this time that the continents were all joined together, and as these ocean floors broke loose, maybe it caused the continents to begin to separate. And now we have different areas across the earth, and now we have new ocean floors that have developed in between these continents. All these things are possible. We don't exactly know what happened and how it happened. Scientifically, though, these things are possible. We do know that, according to the Word of God, He did set new boundaries, new mountains, new valleys, so that it would be designed so that the earth would not flood again.
So what we were discussing, so maybe when the flood, the mountains weren't as tall as they are now, possibly. So
Yes.
they rose taller after the flood. Possibly.
All those things are possible. That is right. Because, and we'll talk about this in just a minute with what time we have left, we do know that mountains existed to some extent just because of the fossils that we find. But, again, it really could have happened during that 150 days before the waters receded. God just may have caused all of it to happen, and maybe everything was almost level during that time. We don't know. The one thing I've always wondered, and understand this is a complete speculation, has just an extra bonus for you. The Garden of Eden. Everybody always wants to know what happened to the Garden of Eden. God sent down an angel, had that flaming sword where nobody could enter it. Did the Garden of Eden continue to exist throughout all that time, that 1,656 years? Where people could still see that would have been perfection. If we'd have lived without sin, that would have been great. But what happened, maybe during that time, is it possible that was completely destroyed? Maybe that's part that sunk down into the middle of the ocean someplace. I don't know, because nobody really knows where the Garden of Eden existed. Some people speculate that the different rivers that we see I don't know what it is, what area that's called now. But it would be east of Israel, where you see the Tigris and Euphrates, that maybe it was all over in that area. Or is that just new names that people came up with over time for those rivers in that area? Nobody knows. Again, speculation. Again, we talked about that. Now, scientific evidence. Again, I'm going to act like I know about sedimentary rock layers, where when a flood happens, when waters gather together, it puts this layer of sedimentary rocks. If you go across all continents, all areas, you dig down to a certain point, you will see that this sedimentary rock exists wherever you go, showing that a localized flood in that area happened during the same time wherever you go. So scientifically, they've proven that there was a worldwide flood at some point in time. That it happened during this time. Because if you go down on all these rock layers, you see it at this exact same level. Marine fossils are found on continents, throughout continents, and on mountains. The Himalaya mountains. You know that you can find marine live fish, fossils on this mountain. Throughout continents, way away from any body of water, you can find fish, fossils. Here's where there would have been a great mudslide at some point in time during a great flood. And those fossils exist, showing that a flood happened during some point in time across everything. The importance of the flood, the spiritual importance. As of the days of Noah, where so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark and did not know until the flood came and took them all away, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. Do you realize that the flood is that example for us to realize that God's going to destroy the earth again? But He's not going to destroy it how we think, they did with the flood. How is He going to destroy the earth this next time? With fire. We see in 2 Peter 3:10 and 11, but the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away with a great noise, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Both the earth and the works that are in them will be burned up. Therefore, since all these things will be dissolved, what manner of persons ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness? Can you imagine how many people that Noah talked to? I said, this is going to happen, guys. I need you to realize it's going to happen. And we saw just a second ago in the verses before, they just kept on with life. They were marrying and giving in marriage. They were eating and drinking. They were having a good time. Every day was just another day. And there was no changes to be made until all of a sudden the floodwaters came. But do you know that one day we're going to hear this great noise, almost like the one we heard is before service whenever the speakers just blew up on us. Kind of scared us all if you were in here. But it's going to be a great noise. And do you know, I think there's going to be that moment where there's a realization from so many of, I never listened. I never responded. I kept life going the same way I always did. I let all these worldly things become so much more important, and I never listened that God's sending His Son back. Now, the thing is, if you listen, you get to be just like Noah. Do you understand that's what the church is? See, He's going to gather His church together and take them home. That's the importance of being in the body of Christ. So that after this life, you get to go home. Just like Noah got to escape the sins of the world and all these evil that existed to start a new home. Make sure that you don't forget the story of Noah. Don't make it into a little kid story anymore. Realize the story that God's trying to teach each one of us. Because first of all, it should change our lives. But second, we should be using it to be like Noah and going out and trying to save other lives as well. Because don't we all want to be in heaven?